Right. Thanks everybody for watching this video. I'm really excited about these interviews. This is the first interview I am going to start doing because I want us um, non-English speaker to improve our English. And today I have Michael Jarvis with me, who is a former English teacher. I met him around 10 years ago. He was my first English teacher when I came to England to learn English. And now he has moved into doing something different, and I'm sure I'm making a lot of mistakes, and he will be correcting me. So please, Mike, thank you very much for being here. And if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey, that would be great.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. So yeah, I used to be an English as a foreign language teacher, teaching students from all over the world. I have since made a career move, and I'm now working in software engineering in the technology industry. But interestingly, working for an EdTech, educational technology platform, and that's kind of how I moved into towards the end of my teaching career. I was doing a lot with kind of digital tools and teaching technologies, and it kind of I found myself more interested in this technology side of things, and decided to pursue that as a career. But I worked in various private language institutions in the UK for about 12 years. And I also worked in Colombia as well, teaching corporate English or business English in various places.
That's amazing and it's really interesting. And thank you because you mentioned in your career journey, and I was reading your profile on LinkedIn, and I noticed that you also work as a clinical administrator in the NHS. And you might not know this, but I'm a nurse, and I am one of the reasons of having this channel is because I want to encourage other healthcare professionals to improve their English. It's really difficult for us when we are trying to talk to colleagues or talk to patients in a different language. It's really nice that you also work in the NHS. And if you don't mind sharing, what did you do back then with the NHS in that administration role you had?
Yeah, so it was during during the COVID pandemic. I was just working on when with the vaccinations, doing just the data collection basically. So I was sitting in the room with the vaccinator and asking the questions and putting them into the computer. So it's not super exciting, but
But it's good because then you are going to give us a lot of tips for our non-English speaker, but also healthcare professionals to improve our language. So what did you enjoy most about teaching when you were doing teaching back then?
I think it would be the sort of wide variety of different people and characters that I met along the way. So I used when I was working in the UK, I used to teach students from all over the world, and as well as learning about different cultures um, and yeah, differences around the world. Obviously, just met a lot of interesting individuals as well. And yeah, I think that's the best thing about teaching is learning about people, I guess.
Yeah, cultures, which happens a lot in the NHS. When you work in the NHS, you also work with lots of people from different parts of the world, but also patients from lots of part of the world. So kind of similar. And what is the biggest mistake people make when we are learning English as an adult? For me, it was really challenging when I came to England, and I was an adult myself already. But I came to study with other students in the room that were really young and were teenagers and probably different backgrounds. And I found that quite challenging. But what do you think, in your point of view as being the teacher, is the biggest mistake we make as adults?
It's difficult to say one mistake. A lot of a lot of times, I suppose adults might be more prone to what we call fossilized errors, which are mistakes you've made for so long that it's actually very difficult to stop yourself, excuse me, to stop yourself making them. So sometimes these might be grammatical errors, sometimes they might be pronunciation errors, but so one example that might be relevant to you as a Spanish speaker is a connection, an interesting connection between grammar and pronunciation,
Mm,
where in English we use two different articles. So we say, for example, a or a, and we also say an or an. And the difference is not just a lot of people think it's a spelling difference. So if you have a vowel letter after the article, then you use an, and if you don't have a vowel, you use ah. But it's actually slightly more than that because it's a pronunciation difference. So where you have um, the letter U, for example, has two pronunciations. You can say like umbrella,
mm,
which is an sound, which if you notice my mouth is open, which when it went at the start of that sound, and if your mouth is open at the start of a sound, that means it's a vowel sound essentially. O, u, that kind of thing. But there's also another pronunciation where U is at the beginning of a word, like university,
mm,
and that's not quite the same because I'm adding. If you kind of listen closely, it's like I'm adding a Y letter, university at the beginning. So this is one thing that can be confusing. It's not the actual point I was going to make initially, but so we say an umbrella and we say a university. So that's an interesting difference there. But the where this relates to Spanish speakers is that there's a pronunciation feature in Spanish
mm,
where if a word starts with the letter S,
mm,
quite often Spanish speakers or in the Spanish language, you add an extra vowel sound to the beginning of that word. So if I think about the word specific
mm.
in Spanish, it sounds more like especific
Yes.
with an e at the beginning, and or an s sound at the beginning. And when you're thinking about using a or an or a or an, a really common error in for Spanish speakers is to say an specific.
Mm,
But obviously in English, because the S sound is not a vowel, it
yeah.
should be a specific. So I'm not sure if you can kind of visualize what I'm saying, but
And
um,
And because I'm consciously, when I am trying to speak English and I'm trying to kind of avoid using my Spanish language, I always make the same mistake. And I noticed that specifically with that word of having the vowel at the beginning in our words in Spanish, specific. But I think it's something to do with my mind or the brain or the mindset. I don't know. Trying to correct that mistake, trying to avoid to make that sound because I don't know, probably you have noticed that in Spanish we tend, depends where you come from, but you try to say all the words, whereas in English you kind of shorten them a bit. So for me, if I'm saying something, I need to say the whole word like specific, and that's why it sounds like with the e at the beginning and then the s. But obviously, trying to learn English and improving, which is now kind of my goal, probably sound a little bit more British rather than to Colombian. I don't know. Is those tips that obviously as adults, like you said, might be difficult to change that mindset of okay, I need to improve that if I want to sound different. And it happens the same when you are, for example, learning. When you are trying to learn driving, sorry, you have all these mistakes, and it's so hard to change them as you are an adult. And another thing I noticed when I was learning English in the classroom is that adults tend to be more shy. That's something you probably noticed than probably teenagers. I don't know if teenagers don't worry about making mistake or sound stupid, but I think as adults we worry about making mistakes, therefore we talk less.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the individual again, because I think it's not all adults and it's not all young people
Teenagers.
who fit into those categories. But um, going back to the idea of fossilized errors, it's the same as anything. So when you're learning, if you have nothing to build from, you've got no, you're not going to make any mistakes. So you mentioned driving, for example. If I learn to drive
Hmm.
in Colombia,
Yeah.
where the steering wheel is on the left-hand side of the car, and I drive on the right-hand side of the road, then that's what's normal to me. And then I move to the UK and the steering wheel is on the other side of the car and I
Mm.
have to drive on the other side. I'm going to be making mistakes on the basis of it doesn't feel normal to me. So I remember driving in Colombia, for example, and when I've driven in places like France and any other kind of normal place that drives on the right side of the road. Um,
English is abnormal. That's what you say.
exactly, yeah. Well, I think there's a few others, but yeah, it's more common to drive on the right. I was finding that because of my what we call muscle memory,
Hmm.
when I went to change in the UK, if I'm changing gear,
Yep.
I use this hand and I reach down, or I take my hand off the steering wheel and I reach down to change the gear.
Yep.
But in Colombia, there's a window right here next to where I'm driving because I'm on the opposite side. And I know that there's a window there, but because my body feels like this is something I know how to do,
Hmm.
whenever I went to change gear, I would hit the window with my hand just because that's the reflex. I need to change gear. Oh, wait, other hand. Okay. So it's it's something that you have to, there's no, I don't think there's really a quick fix. It's just something that you have to be really aware of and just keep trying. And it's like I said, it's muscles. And in particular, that's relevant to pronunciation where you are using muscles in your mouth and in your tongue.
Yep.
If you're making mistakes, first of all, you need to notice them. And there's various ways that you can go about that. One might be using a teacher, or even perhaps these days some sort of AI tool to point out the mistakes in case you're not aware of them. Another thing is, you might find this with your podcasts, but another thing is recording yourself. So lots of people and lots of teachers advise, not just when you're learning a foreign language, but if you're trying to improve your presentation skills or you're trying to um, even if you're trying to kind of develop a sports technique in schools, quite often the instructor will video you so that they can show you afterwards and they can say, look, this is what you did, and this is, and you can do that yourself. You can record yourself, you can do an audio recording of yourself speaking, listen back to it afterwards and think, yourself, does anything sound strange there? Because it may not sound strange while you're speaking it, but it may sound strange when you listen back afterwards. And you can also do the same in video. Screenshot yourself, or kind of as we're doing now, and watch the recording back afterwards, and consider what sounds strange or unusual. And once you notice things, that's the first step, and then you have to start correcting yourself. So I have a good example from when I used to do teacher training sessions. And my boss at the time, my manager, my boss said, you're about to do this presentation for some people. Would you like to do it in front of me, and I'll give you some feedback?" So I gave the presentation just to him, just me and him in the room, and he made some notes and he fed them back to me afterwards. And one of the pieces of feedback he gave, in English, like all languages, we have small phrases which we put in
Hmm.
to our sentences which don't mean anything. So uh, an example might be in Spanish, for example, you say "o sea," which is a little bit like "I mean" in English,
Hmm.
but you don't need to say it sometimes. You just drop it in, or even pues, you might say in Spanish, which the sentence means the same without that, but you just put it in, and it gives sometimes gives you a bit of thinking time, but other
Mhm.
times it's just a bad habit and or just a habit.
Yeah.
And the feedback that my manager gave me was he said, "Did you realize that during that presentation you said the phrase kind of like, which is a common thing for native speakers to kind of drop in. Um, I actually just did it there. You may not have even noticed because it was very quickly. I said it's a common thing for native speakers to kind of
Kind of
just
like.
drop in. Um, he said, "Did you realize you said that 72 times during your presentation?" And
Wow.
he'd counted all the times that I'd said it, and I knew that I said it occasionally,
Yeah.
but when he said 72 times during that presentation, I thought, oh wow, that does sound um, sort of too much. And um, and immediately after he said that, every time I said it, I kind of realized, and it was really difficult to start with, but I was able to kind of think about it and to stop doing it because in that example what you can do, and I'm kind of actively doing it right now, even though I'm still saying kind of sometimes, it's not a problem, but when things are done too much, that's when things can become a problem. But one thing that people sometimes don't realize is that you can just pause while you're speaking.
Mm.
So instead of trying to fill every possible gap
Stop.
with some words,
Yep.
and that's when you start saying like, kind of like this, like
You know,
and filling these words in.
people
You
say
can
you
just
know.
stop, especially in a professional context or in sorry, public speaking context. Pausing is actually a really good skill to develop, and I think it's the same with these fossilized errors. When they're pointed out to you, you then can start noticing them. So every time you do it, and you will keep doing it, you have to kind of, no, not kind of, you have to just continue with your thing that you're trying to say, um, adding in the corrections. So yeah, I don't think there's a, one day it was work, one day it was bad, the next day it was good kind of
Mhm.
approach. It's just a gradual improvement that you have to make.
Good, and
And I
thank you
think it's
because
important not to give up just because you think, oh, I can't do it. And then, you've stopped focusing on it. It is just something you have to keep focusing on.
thank you. That's really nice that you kind of mention kind of mention three topics that are interest of mine. One of them is muscle memory, which I'm gonna talk to you about it later in a bit. But also AI, and I think because AI is a big thing, and now you are an expert on AI, or you know a lot of about AI, and also as an English teacher, it's kind of important for us that some people are rely on AI a lot and probably trying to improve less. So I would like to know your insights around AI and education and learning English as a second language. Um, what do you notice could be a good thing about AI or maybe not so good about AI in terms of learning a new language?
Well, the obvious not so good thing about AI is it makes it very easy to avoid learning English because instead of having to struggle to write that email to my boss or to my friend in another country, I can now just get ChatGPT to write it for me. And
Mhm.
then I think the one of the main problems is that we often then won't even read that so much. So because AI is a really really good learning opportunity, but it's not a good learning opportunity if you don't use it. So if you don't fully exploit it for being a learning opportunity. So if you get AI to write an email for you, go through that email, use that email as a learning opportunity and say, oh, I didn't know I could write that in that way and make notes of it and to have a separate thing that's not ChatGPT, where you're actually keeping notes in a traditional way, whether that's on your computer or on your phone or in a physical notebook. I think those skills are, we forget to maintain those skills of actually um, keeping notes. And I think you won't. It's the difference between passive and active learning. You can learn things passively, but it will take you a lot longer. Um, and it's a lot less measurable than active learning, which is where learning is my primary focus. So I'm actively writing in my notebook. When I learn a new phrase, I'm carrying my notebook with me when I'm out and about. And when I learn a new phrase, I'm writing that in there. When I notice one of these muscle memory errors or fossilized errors, I'm making a note of that and circling it and double underlining it with arrows pointing at it so that so that a lot of things is about creating memories. And, people talk about different learning styles and different memory styles. But So what you've got to do is you've got to create some kind of image or some kind of memorable thing for you. For me, when I write something in a notebook, quite often I will remember where that is in my notebook and how I wrote it on the page, so that so if I make that same mistake again, I'll go, oh no, I've got that in my notebook, and it creates a physical link for your memory to kind of hold on to. I think so. Yeah, I think being active about your learning and not just passive and not just hoping it will come, but making every effort that you can to to make sure that that these things are being as effective as possible. So yeah, when you've got that email or that text that you've had ChatGPT write, going through it, making sure you understand it, and then even thinking, um, you know, we're obviously in the very early days of learning how to manage AI. But what people do sometimes is, and I don't know if this is true um, for anyone watching this, but um, the the text that the AI gives you is often too perfect. So
Mm.
people might try and put mistakes in there to make it seem like it was them. And
Yep.
they might even say to the AI, can you make this less, can you make it more like a non-native speaker has said this?
Guilty.
Um, and then exactly, but then you kind of and then and we all want to kind of save time, but that's the thing. So you won't be helping yourself to learn
Mm.
unless you're kind of going through it yourself and saying, "Oh, does that sound like me? Okay, no, I'll change that bit because that doesn't sound like me." But now I understand it because now I've read it, and
Yep.
now actually maybe I'll leave it in because now I understand it. I can legitimately say that yes, I would say that in an email. So yeah, I think rather than getting AI to produce something that's really good and
Mhm.
then getting it to make it worse so that it sounds like you, why don't you just learn so that you come up to the standard of the AI stuff, and then you can confidently say, yeah, I'm happy for that to be my words because I now know exactly what that means. And
Yep.
if you don't know exactly what it means, then change it to something that you do know what it means, so that that final thing that you give out or that you kind of publish or whatever is something that you fully understand and that you've learned from.
Yeah, this is really interesting because something of a feedback that you gave me around using AI is that you, as a native English speaker, you immediately notice what has been written with AI and what hasn't. And for some people, it makes it boring to read. Like you said, when I see something and I know it's AI, I'm not gonna read it. I'm not
Mm.
interested. And it was really interesting, and it's a good feedback for all of us trying to use AI to learn or to speed time, because obviously it saves time. But yeah, having the kind of taking the time to read what the tool is giving us also help us to improve our communication, our written communication skill, which is a big thing in healthcare. We have to write lots of clinical notes, emails, incident reports, and it takes a lot of time, especially when you are non-English speaker. But again, probably, like you said, if someone is reading an email, they will immediately notice that that wasn't written by you. It was AI, and that will make like,
Yeah, I think you have to consider the audience basically. So,
yeah.
and you have to tell when you're prompting your AI, you have to tell the AI to consider the audience. And if you
Mm,
if you haven't read it, then why should anyone else read it? That's a big factor. And I think
yeah.
all too often we have to do these boring things.
Yep.
But so there might be situations where it is perfectly appropriate for incident reports.
Yep.
Who reads that and unless they really have to. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And maybe, you also get these situations where um, people write texts, perhaps like an incident report, that moving forwards into the future, the people who read that, well, it may not be people at all. It would probably be other AI agents. So I think this is fine if you're producing these big texts and you
Mhm.
can confirm that it's valid.
Yep.
Um, you don't need to worry too much about the style because the only other consumer of that text is going to be some other AI that's going to read it and say, okay,
Mhm.
these are the main points.
Right.
But it is worth definitely considering, like, is this aimed at a human? Am I sending an email? Not many people yet have AIs reading all their emails, although I think that is probably going to come pretty soon.
Mm.
Um, is it for a human? In which case, length is a huge factor. If I see something that's a page of text,
Mm.
that's usually where I think nobody writes that much in an email unless it's like to a friend and you're telling them all the stuff you've been doing for the last year. That's when I might write a really long email. But normally emails are a few short paragraphs at most. Um, so think about that when you compose some text with AI, think, is that too long? And get the AI to summarize it if it is too long. Because that's
Okay.
what the other person will do anyway. If they receive a big text, they'll go, "Oh, I can't be bothered with this. Copy, paste, ChatGPT, summarize this, please." Okay, great. So what happened is you gave, well, one person initially, they wrote a short prompt into ChatGPT.
Yeah.
ChatGPT expanded it into a huge bit of text. The next person copied it into ChatGPT and said, "Can you reduce this into a small prompt again?" So the initial thing that the first user wrote is actually probably more useful to the end person
Yeah.
than the bit of text that got created in the middle for no reason.
Oh,
So
thank you.
yeah.
I haven't thought about that, and that's really, really good feedback because I'm the yeah, exactly. I'm that person that won't read long emails unless I have time and have nothing else to do. But I always prefer short emails. And what you just said, it makes sense. And that's something that, because obviously with AI now we can write, endless, like a Bible in 5 minutes. But it's interesting because probably the end or the receiver won't read it, will do like you just did, like you just said. So that's really interesting. And you mentioned something. And do you think that AI will replace teachers?
Um,
Because lots of
I
people are
don't
worried nowadays that AI is gonna steal jobs, blah blah blah. So I want to know, what do you think about that?
What if you think about what would you like for your children? Would you like them to have human teachers, or would you like them to have AI? Would you like them to
Human,
just be looking at an iPad all day?
human, please, if
Well, then I
possible.
don't think they will replace
This
teachers
one.
because it's a good example of, yes, it might replace lots of things that teachers do,
Mm-hmm.
but it won't replace human contact, which is what children need, or even adults learning languages. At some point, you need some human contact, and you don't, you know, maybe learning languages as an adult is an area which could become more and more self-service where people can do it if they want to. But it's been that way for I mean, there's been lots of tools and lots of games or videos where you can learn without a teacher, but people still choose to use a teacher. Um, so I don't think necessarily that it will replace it, but it will likely replace a lot of the things that a teacher does. So, for example, when you give your teacher um, an essay or an exam that you've completed, the teacher might say, "Okay, I'll have my AI mark this, and now I will go through the results with the learner, with the student." And that saves both of you time because the teacher doesn't have to spend all week saying, "Oh, sorry, I forgot to mark your homework, or I forgot to bring it to class," because it's been done in 5 minutes after you finished the paper. So I think yeah, I don't think it will replace human teaching because I don't think anyone wants it to. But I think it will possibly improve the quality of human teaching, just like it does for many other industries.
And it's interesting because one of the exams that we have to do as a healthcare professionals, if especially we are coming from abroad, is called OET, Occupational
Occupational.
English Test,
Yeah.
that is specific for healthcare professionals. And nowadays, like lots of my mentees that are trying to learn English, to be able to convalidate their professions in all English speaking countries. They ask me, but do I need to know English to be able to do that? Yes, you need to still know English. It doesn't mean that we have AI nowadays. It doesn't mean that you don't need to learn English. And also, if you want to learn English and if you want to do the OET exam, it's better if you have a real teacher because, yes, AI will help you to improve, to practice, to correct. It will be like that kind of 24/7, probably cheaper version of having a teacher, but still having someone like you. And that's why I create this space because I can't teach English. I don't have the skills of teaching or probably the knowledge that you have as when you were an English teacher. But I have this clinical background that help the teachers and the professionals to kind of speak the same language because one thing is to learn English itself, just to communicate in the day to day, or as I call it, street English. But another thing is the English that you speak at work, clinical English, vocabulary, medicine management, all the stuff that sometimes teachers don't understand. And yes, you can use AI, but having that person, like, pointing out those mistakes that you said is really important. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, yes, we can do a lot of things with AI, but still having that real connection is quite important to probably learn a new language and improve, like in my case. What do you think, just to close the interview, what do you think is the most important skill that professionals should learn when they are trying to learn English? Like probably using more grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. What do you think will be the most important skill for professionals, especially to communicate?
Um, I think it's maybe not the same all around the world, but I think in the UK, um, there's a lot of people joke about the fact that we're very overly polite. So we say sorry and there's so just a very obvious example is that um, we say sorry a lot, but that translates. So we're also quite indirect. So if you think there's lots of cultures which are more direct, I've heard a comparison between English speakers and German or Polish speakers, who are a lot more direct. And the language itself doesn't feature so much these kind of indirect ways of speaking. But one thing that I think is important, as well as having a good control of the language, is also noticing these cultural differences in the way that we speak English. So there's actually a grammatical feature called indirect questions. And in general, and this is an example, um, I could say, what time is it? Or I could say, um, there's lots of different ways I could say it, but I could say, do you know what time it is? Or I could say, would you mind telling me the time? Or can I ask you the time? These kind of things where we actually prefix with another question or with a slightly, this is why it's called indirect questions. It's because